We're delighted tonight to have Josh and Brent of the Beekman 1802 Heirloom Farm in Sharon Springs, New York. They've done so many things in their young lives that it's a little bit embarrassing for somebody who's quite a bit older to have to list all of these things that they've accomplished, but I'll do my best. Josh is an author, an advertising executive. He spent some time, I believe, as a drag queen, and he's now a farmer, a cookbook author, a product developer, and an entrepreneur extraordinaire. Brent is a medical doctor and an MBA. He was an executive with Martha Stewart Living. He's now a farmer, an adjunct professor in marketing, a cookbook author, and also an entrepreneur extraordinaire. Their story is indeed a fabulous one. They have a show called The Fabulous Beekman Boys on the Cooking Channel. They entered, not only did they enter and get on, but they entered and won the Amazing Race in 2012. They've developed a lifestyle product line, both through email and in their shop, and it's distributed through various retail outlets, including Williams-Sonoma and Anthropologie. And they're all about creating community and helping small farmers develop sustainable business models. They are thoughtful and witty and seem to be able to accomplish whatever they put their mind on. They have a new vegetable cookbook that is both beautiful and practical. I know from personal experience. I made one of their soups last night, and it was quite spectacular. They've graciously agreed to be here and to do whatever format we wish, and then so they will spend some time, I think, going through their story, and then they'll be happy to take questions. I do want you to know that we're videoing tonight, so we will have it and be able to put it up on our website. As a result, when they take questions, we may ask you if you would repeat the questions before, and then when you get tired, let us know and we'll stop the process. Books are if you didn't buy a book with your ticket, the cookbooks are for sale. In the back of the room, and they will be signing their books after they finish. So with that, please, Brent and Josh, thanks so much for coming.
Is it on?
I think so, yeah.
No.
No? Oh. I've come down with the worst case of hiccups, so if I'm hiccuping throughout this, I apologize.
Which is wonderful for me, because finally I get to speak, and you won't interrupt. So you just be quiet over there, and I'll do all the work.
All right.
So we don't really have a formal presentation tonight. Our life has always been so random that we have tried a million different ways to come up with some amazing PowerPoint that gave you all the solutions you would ever need in your life, and we don't have that. So tonight is just sort of a description of what we've been doing, and maybe you can help us at the end, and you can give us your solutions with what you take away from our story.
And we really do love questions from the audience, so if anything that we say makes a light bulb go off in your head, just please feel free to ask us a question, because we always feel the questions are the most entertaining part of the talk anyway.
So I'm just curious, how many people have zero idea who we are? Go ahead and you can be totally honest. Okay, perfect, that's great.
So you have to ask the first questions.
Yeah. How many people knew about us, from our very first television show, or before our first television show? Beekman Boys, okay, we got that. And then how many people knew about us from The Amazing Race? Oh, pretty good. Not a lot of CBS watchers on the island here. But
these are very intelligent people. They don't watch CBS.
So as you can see, we've sort of had a really random rise to wherever we are, and people have come into our story at different channels. So we thought we'd just go ahead and tell our story from the beginning, and then everyone can be up to date, and we're all on the same page. And then we'll do this at the next place we go to. And eventually, everyone will have the same story in their head. But the big question we always get asked is, what is Beekman 1802? And that is it's more than the name of our company. It's the name of our farm. It's the name of what we like to call our movement. And it's also the name of our customers and the people who have been following us for a long time. We call them Beekmans as well. Like anybody who buys from us or shops from us or follows our story, everyone's a Beekman. And the reason we came up with Beekman is because that is the man who started the farm that we live on right now. And he started it, coincidentally, in 1802. So a little bit about us. This is the two of us when we first bought our farm in upstate New York.
This was the very first picture we ever took on our farm.
And Brent's Background, this was in 2005, and Brent used to be a geriatrician at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And I always love this picture. This was
one of my favorite patients. She was about 90-something years old, Russian woman. She didn't speak a single word of English. And I would go to see her once a week, and she always wanted to dance. But she was 90-something, so she couldn't really move that well. So it was more like hugging and like swaying back and forth. And this was on my last day. So I decided to leave medicine and go back to business school, and this was on my last day.
Can't you tell she just has the biggest crush on him? Isn't that great? And so this is Brent with another one of his patients. Oh, no, wait, that's Martha. I got that.
He loves to make that joke.
So then after Brent went to business school, he actually wrote a letter to Martha Stewart while she was in jail, or as she likes to say.
She was a captive audience.
As she likes to say, my time in Alderson, like it was a girls' school. And so he was in business school, and he had been tasked at the hospital with building a new geriatric center, and he needed to raise over $5 million. So he thought that Martha was such a great example of someone who was aging, but an amazing contributor, productive and all that. So he wrote her a letter in jail and said, I think you need to give me $5 million to build this center.
And she did.
And she did. As soon as she got out of jail, she called him up to her place. She still had that little ankle thing on her. She was under house arrest. And Brent let her win at Scrabble, and he got $5 million for it. So he built the Martha Stewart Center for Living. Now, what was I doing during this time? I am a writer. This came out after we bought the farm, but as Sue Ellen said, I was working in advertising. When I first moved to New York, I was also a drag queen at night. And
that was way before I met him.
Yes, and I was working in advertising. I'd written a book about those years as a drag queen. And we were those kind of obnoxious Manhattan couples. Do you have any of those here? Maybe a couple.
You have obnoxious Bostonites who
yes,
come here?
Those couples. And we would rent a car every autumn, and we would put on our very best Ralph Lauren plaids and creased jeans, and we would drive to upstate New York, and all the upstaters all the locals would be ready for us with big bushels of apples that they had bought from Washington State and marked up and would sell them to us. And we were perfectly happy doing that every year. And one year we got lost in a tiny little village called Sharon Springs, New York. And Sharon Springs was a town that had a population of 90,000 people in its heyday at the turn of the century. Every summer, it had 90,000 people. It was a spa town. It was like Saratoga Springs, except bigger. And through the years, it had seen terrible, rough times. And when we stumbled on it, it was still this town that had these huge old hotels and structures that were all abandoned. I called it, when we drove into town, there's these buildings that are empty and all the lights are off. I called it a cross between Petticoat Junction and The Shining. And we were like, what is this place? And there was one hotel that had lights on still, and we stayed there, and we fell in love with it. And on the way out of town the next day, we drove by this.
And it was like a siren call, Did any of you buy your house on Martha's Vineyard or buy a house on Martha's Vineyard because you were here on vacation and then you saw it? That happens all the time. That's exactly what happened to us. And this was in 2006 when we first saw it. So, at that time we were in our mid-30s. It was 2006, so they were virtually giving away mortgages. All of our contemporaries were buying second homes. So we thought, we need a second home too. And so we bought this place, $1 million empty farm.
Think about it. 2006, mortgages are free. It's, you know, a $1 million empty abandoned farm. I mean, what a steal, right? What could happen to property values? Well, we found out.
Yes.
So
we took out we cashed in everything that we had ever earned, you know, everything we'd ever saved up to buy this property. Took out literally $1 million mortgage, and bought this property. And then in 2008, when the recession hit, we both lost our jobs within a month of one another, and it really was kind of one of those oh crap moments, you know, like what in the world are we going to do? And we were depressed for like 4 months because, does anyone remember 2008 vividly? Yeah, so if you were living in a city and you were working in media or finance or anything like that, it was the end of the world. And you couldn't even foresee how we were going to get out of it, you know. So we thought, oh, we're going to be unemployed for the next decade. And
but we had one little stroke of luck that happened before we lost our jobs, and we didn't realize it at the time, but right after we moved in, we got a letter in our mailbox from a handwritten letter from a man named John, who's now known as Farmer John. And he wrote us a letter, and he said, I'm losing my farm. I live up the road. I'm losing my farm. I have 80 goats. I need to find a new home for them in 30 days, or I have to send them to slaughter.
And if anyone has seen our show, you know how much Farmer John loves these goats.
And so we at the time, we were still obnoxious Manhattanites, and we thought, well, you know, we're going to take in these 80 goats, and we're going to have a little petting zoo, and all our obnoxious friends can come up and pet the animals.
And we don't have to do any of the work for it. You know,
it was
we're just
perfect.
here on the weekends and petting goats.
So this was before we lost our jobs. So you can imagine when we lost our jobs, not only did we have to pay 2 mortgages and feed ourselves, we had to feed 80 goats.
And Farmer John,
who eats a lot.
Yeah.
And but what do you do?
Well, when I always say, you know, life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, life gives you goat milk. You're going to make every single thing you can make from goat milk. So we started making goat milk soap, goat milk cheese, goat milk fudge sauce, goat milk caramel. Everything that you can make out of goat milk, we were making it.
And we actually did pretty well. Brent swallowed his pride and called up Martha and said, you know, can we come on the show and make some goat milk soap and launch our company? So we were fortunate to actually launch the company on Martha's show, which was very helpful. We sold over $8,000 of soap on that very first day. So it was terrific, but, you know,
you're not going to pay off $1 million mortgage with soap.
Yeah, even Brent with his MBA knew that.
I quickly calculated those numbers and said
it wasn't going to work. So what wound up happening was we started meeting our neighbors. And that sounds like such a simple thing, but it was something that we never learned to do in New York City. And a lot of people don't learn to do in urban areas.
We lived in the same apartment building for about a decade and only knew one other couple in the entire apartment building. And I think that's true not just in New York City, but in so many parts of the country. You don't know the person who lives right next door to you. You may know them by their face, or you may know them by their name, but you don't know the first thing about them. And when we moved to the farm, we were fish out of water. We had no idea how to run a farm. Farmer John knew how to do goats, but when we wanted to raise pigs for the first time, we had to go to the next farm over who was raising pigs and say, how do you raise pigs? Or if we wanted to buy a new tractor, we had to go to the other farmer and say, what tractor should we buy? We did a lot of door knocking and a lot of Google searching and YouTube watching. You know, the first cheeses we made were made by watching a YouTube video.
How to make goat cheese, enter.
But interestingly, what happened as a result of that is that we became such a part of the community because you could think, okay, Schoharie County, which is where our farm is located, is the poorest county in New York State. It's very agricultural. And so you can think these 2 gay guys from New York City bought the biggest property in town. You know, you can imagine what they were thinking. But the fact that we went out to them and asked them for their help actually ingratiated us to them. And I think that, and it wasn't strategy on our part. We really were kind of...
We needed help bad.
Yeah, ships at sea. And I think in retrospect, what we realized is that everyone wants to think that the culmination of their life's work is that they can teach someone else, that you're an expert in it, right? And so by us going out and knocking on their doors and saying, hey, we know that you know how to do this, please help us, it made them feel good about what they were doing.
And as a byproduct of meeting all those people, that's actually what turned our fate around. It's great. We had a good start with the soap. We had a good start with the cheese. But as a byproduct of meeting our neighbors, what happened was we met one neighbor, and they would say, hey, you got to go meet Karen down the road. She has these amazing antique looms. I see your soap is selling. You have a website. Maybe you should sell some of her linens. And so we would go meet with Karen, and she was making these linens, and we love them. And so we put them up on the website, and Karen would say, oh my gosh, you got to go meet Michael McCarthy. He's making these vases. I think it's totally your style. You got to go meet him. So we met a blacksmith in the next town over, and then we started working with him to design stuff. And that's, I think, when we really realized our calling was we call ourselves farmers, but we're not farmers. The people that live there are farmers. Any more than we were blacksmiths or soap makers or cheese makers. We learned to do all that with them, but they're the experts. And they were the ones that gave us their skills to help us launch a company. And the thing that we had to offer this community was we knew how to market things. So that's how we called our company Beekman 1802, and we found all these amazing people making these incredible things, and we're able to pull it all together under one brand and use our city connections.
I think we learned that lesson
it.
even before the artisans, because when Farmer John first came, we were like, oh, we're going to help with the milking, and we're going to get up every morning and do that, and do it every afternoon.
Go so well.
And what we learned, like on day 3, was that the goats did not want us touching them. They were used to Farmer John milking them, and with our hands were not the right hands. And it was just a real disaster. And so that made us think, okay, well, it takes a lot to not only make a successful farm or to make a successful business. Someone has to be in charge of milking the goats, and then someone has to be in charge of making the cheese, and someone has to be in charge of selling the cheese. And that's why when you think about all the amazing farms on Martha's Vineyard, and we visited several of them today, when you think about everything that farmer has to do, it's almost overwhelming, because not only are they out in the fields growing stuff, they're trying to deal with whatever weather pattern or whatever God has sent them that season, but they're also thinking, how can I market this? Who am I going to sell it to? What am I going to do if people don't come and buy it this week? It's probably one of the hardest jobs on earth, and we're so thankful that we had one component of that not only helped our farm, but has helped so many other farms and artisans in our community.
So then a funny thing happened during all of this. We got a letter from a woman at a television network called Planet Green. And she had been reading our blog, and she thought it was just absolutely hilarious that these 2 gay guys from New York City were learning to become goat farmers. And she said, I think you guys have a television show.
She said, you're the gay Green Acres.
Yes, that was exactly what she said. And she said, do you want to do a reality show? Now, we're savvy, and we're like, we watch Real
Housewives too, so we know.
We were like, maybe that's not the best idea if you're starting a company to do a reality TV show and look like fools. But the opportunity was really great. It could spread the message around. And the one thing we said was, you can make as much fun of us as you want, because we don't know what we're doing and we're learning on the job. We said, but you cannot make fun of the people in our village. We said, I know what you're going to try to do. We know how TV works. You're going to make everybody into Honey Boo Boo, and that's going to make life hard for us and is not fair. So, to their credit, that's exactly what they did. They made us look really stupid and made our town look really great. And what was wonderful about that was it captured the imagination of heartland America. People really fell in love with our story and fell in love with this main street that was helping these 2 gay guys land on their feet again. And the best example we have of that is, we started a harvest festival the first year we were in these dire straits in Sharon Springs, because we wanted to bring a few tourists in. So we started this harvest festival. We got the town folk to help us. About 500 people showed up. Everybody thought it was a great success. It was wonderful. That was when they were starting to film that first season of the show. So they filmed that harvest festival, and then they aired it that following year. And then by the time the second Harvest Festival came around, there was over 5,000 people that descended on the town. And what was incredibly interesting was that they never played our show in our area. So our neighbors had never seen the Fabulous Beekman Boys. They had no idea that the show was being played all around. I mean, they knew, intellectually, that it was being played all around the world: Australia, Norway, Canada. And so when 5,000 people showed up on our doorstep on the day of this harvest festival,
Including Rosie O'Donnell.
including
She
Rosie
showed up.
O'Donnell, all hell broke loose. We have one street in town, one street, and the town is probably as long as this building.
Yeah, our main street is this long,
and
and it has a stoplight right there where the screen is.
It got so bad that somebody called the DOT, the Department of Transportation, and they wheeled in one of those big signs that they have at traffic accidents, you know, the flashing ones, and they put it at the top of our village, and it kept flashing. It's a caution harvest festival. Caution harvest festival. And so this mass descended on our village, but this is what makes our community so great. This mass descended on our village. We ran out of food. We only had 1.5 restaurants at the time. The half restaurant was a gas station. And we ran out of food. It was Saturday morning. We ran out of food by Saturday lunch. All these people from Norway, from Australia, from everywhere, wandering around hungry. It was a complete debacle, Caution Harvest Festival. And then about 2 in the afternoon, we started seeing people walking around with hot dogs and hamburgers. And I asked one of them, I'm like, where did that come from? And they said, there's a guy up on the hill in the village. And it turns out one of our neighbors had driven 40 miles to the next town, to the grocery store, bought all of the hot dogs, all the hamburgers, all the potato salad, all the potato chips, everything basically in the county, brought it home, grilled it on his front porch, and gave it away to people. Gave it away because he didn't want people to have come from all over the world and to come to Sharon Springs and go home hungry. So that's when we really knew that our little village was something special, when we all worked together. And I show this picture because, so this was the year that the 5,000 people came down. And you can see, Brent, use your finger.
Oh.
See that guy right there? Where is it? Here. See that? That's Joe Todd. He's over 80 years old, and he was in charge of traffic. So I'm telling you, there had not been that many people in Sharon Springs in the last 50 years combined. So that is, and actually now the festival has grown to, last year was over 12,000 people. And now we have Etsy as a co-sponsor this year. We're going corporate. We'll sell the town. So during this time, do you want to talk about the Heirloom cookbooks?
Sure. Well, you know, as our company was growing, we tried to crystallize exactly what do we want our company to represent. And part of our idea was, you know, we're seasonal living because we're living on a farm and we're growing almost all the food that we personally consume, and everything that we, every recipe we create or every product we design is really based on what we need to make life on the farm better. And so we thought, okay, is it seasonal living? And so that's still part of our ethos. But really what was most important to us was what we have come to call heirloom living. And to us, an heirloom is anything that has value greater than its monetary value. Right, and so whether it's a piece of furniture we're designing or a linen that we're designing, it's something that is so well made, if it's an actual physical product, that it's going to last from this generation to the next generation, and it's going to have lots of stories built into it.
Because it lasts for generation to generation, just stories develop around it.
Or if it's one of our food products, which obviously we hope doesn't last till the next generation, it's so different and so exquisite that you develop a story around it because you put it on your table.
Yeah,
And so,
I just want to tell the story of the recipe contest where we started
sure.
it.
Yeah.
So we started this whole heirloom thing. We said we had a recipe contest on our site, and we said send in your family recipe, any family recipe you want. And then we're gonna, some winner is gonna get, I forget what the prize is, but the winner will be judged.
a trip to New York City.
Was it the trip? The prize is gonna be determined half on the recipe and half on the story. And so people send in their family stories. And the winner, the one I loved, is this woman who had a cinnamon roll recipe from her mom. And she said, I have it on a card. My mom wrote it to me years ago. And I've never made it because her mom was still alive. She said, I've never made it because I've got everything on there, all the ingredients, all the directions, but there's no cinnamon in the ingredients. And she said, finally one day I'm like, I want to make these rolls. So I called my mom and I'm like, why does your cinnamon roll recipe have no cinnamon? And her mom said, well, because you only write down recipes, the things that you don't remember. So, I mean, a cinnamon roll recipe, you remember, put cinnamon in.
She was actually the winner of the contest, and I actually remember her submission because she had taken a photo of or how she had that recipe recorded was that she had a photo of her mom's kitchen, and on the wall above the stove was that recipe written. And the cinnamon was left out of it. So it was like these 7 ingredients written on the wall, because I guess that's what her mom made every Sunday morning. But we love, those are the type of recipes that we love, those recipes that you make so often that they have stories built around them. So your kid goes off to college and they come back for the first time that semester and like, oh, Mom, please make this thing, And so we really do try to focus on what we call heirloom living, and really appreciating everything and making sure that the quality is so great that you will appreciate it. And I think that some of what?
Okay.
I think some of that comes from the greater realization that we had from our entire experience coming to the farm, because in looking back at it, leading up to 2008. Everything, I think, in our existence, and probably in a lot of your existence, was about instant gratification. If you saw something, you wanted it, and you could get it because you had unlimited credit. And obviously, that was what led to the financial crisis, right? This idea that we had to have things instantly. And what the biggest lesson that we have learned living on the farm and growing our own food, when we run out of the last tomato jar that we canned in the middle of March, we don't have another tomato until the end of August, And when we taste that first tomato at the end of August, it tastes like the most amazing thing that you have ever tasted, because there is power in delayed gratification, right? Absence really does make the heart grow fonder. And I think that's probably our biggest lesson in it. And we would like to say we're going to focus on designing something that has this true value. So maybe it's a little bit more expensive than the pasta sauce that you could buy at Stop and Save. But it has something additional to it, some additional value to it, some additional story to it that makes it worthwhile.
So if we sort of consider one of the biggest things that's happened in our lives, it would have to be the Amazing Race. And this also goes back to that value that we said when we first learned there, and we started knocking on doors, and we started asking people questions and learning, and just opening ourselves up to everybody. And everyone that approached us, we would ask and learn from them. And the Amazing Race happened when we were in Santa Monica.
Yeah, so when the very first cookbook came out, we were at the Santa Monica Public Library doing a book signing, and this little lady walked up. She was probably 80. Her name, now I know her name was Sandra, and she had her oxygen tank with her, and very unassuming, and she's like, oh, I just love your show, and every week my next door neighbor comes over and we watch your show together, and it's our bonding time. And in our minds, we're like, oh, these two sweet little old ladies, watching our show and laughing at us. And then she added, and she's the president of CBS Reality TV. And honestly, I did not believe her. And I thought she was, senile. And so I said, well, if this woman is such a big fan of ours, why aren't we on The Amazing Race? And she's like, I'm going to tell her. And then we didn't think anything of it. And then 2 days later, we were back at the farm, the phone rang, and we picked it up, and they're like, hi, we're calling from The Amazing Race. We heard you wanted to run. And that's how we got on that show.
And so anybody who has ever seen the show, that it's 12 teams of 2 people that get these clues, and you have no money, no food, no water, no anything, and you have to race around the world. You open an envelope, it tells you the next city you have to go to, you do a bunch of challenges in that city, and whoever hits the finish line in that city last is eliminated. And then you open your next clue, and you go to another country, somewhere else. No money, no food, no water, no sleep. So we decided before we left, first of all, we're not going to win this thing. I mean, anybody who watches these shows, you can see, most everybody in there is in their 20s, and there's a football player and a jiu-jitsu world champion, Olympic snowboarders. We're like, you know what? We're the middle-aged gay couple that's supposed to start the game, throw in a few funny one-liners, and then get eliminated by 4. We're like, that's our role. There's no way we're going to win this. So rather than work, we did go to the gym and stuff, but rather than try to become experts in all these physical things and all that, we said, you know what, we're going to do the same thing we do with our life. We're going to work hard, we're going to help our neighbors, and we're never going to quit. And And then so that's how we started the race, and we got a lot of flack in the beginning. The people that love that show are very competitive about that show, and and there's $1 million at stake, and nobody could understand why, when our teammates needed help, we would help them. I mean, it's admittedly a pretty stupid thing to do when you're racing around the world for $1 million to help your teammates. But we're racing around the world with people, we got to like them, and if they were stuck on something, we helped them. And for whatever reason, we were in second to last place on almost every leg of the race, and we did not get eliminated. And then in the very final leg, they called us the ultimate underdogs. This was one of Brent's final challenges. He was 15 stories above the Brooklyn Naval Yard in a straitjacket, hanging upside down from a crane, and he had to get out of the straitjacket. And then what they didn't tell him was, once you're out of the straitjacket, they release you and you're on a bungee cord. So he didn't know that. He thought he actually undid the straitjacket and was falling.
This was one of my scariest moments of my entire life because not only because I was 15 stories above the Brooklyn Navy Yard in a straitjacket, but when they were hoisting me up, I could see, because you're being hoisted upside down, I could see at the top a person sitting up there. And I thought, oh, well, once I get to the top, that person is going to tell me how to get out of the straitjacket, because I had no idea how to get out of the straitjacket. And so they hoisted me up, it stopped, and then I'm hanging there just waiting for him to say, well, now do this. And so I'm hanging there, and then finally he starts to talk, and he said, you can start now. And that was the moment I almost had a heart attack. I mean, I could feel my heart start beating really fast, and then I thought, if I go to that place, I'm never going to return from it.
You can't see, but there's a little stream of pee.
That's not true.
So anyway, that was a huge thing that changed our lives. And we realized at that point, that sort of put us on a much bigger stage. There's a lot of people that watched it. And we realized our community had helped us so much and had saved us in what we've been able to give to our community. We wanted to do on a somewhat bigger scale.
Well, hold on. I want to just say, it sounds like the whole process was a lot easier than it was.
No, it doesn't. It sounds very confusing to them.
But when we started the business, about 8 months after we started the business, Josh got a job offer back in the city. And we thought, okay, well, we're going to have to sell a lot of product to pay off $1 million mortgage, plus the cost of actually just starting up a farm-based business, which is really capital intensive. So he decided to take the job back in the city, and we're like, okay, it's just going to be a year of sacrifice, right? Anyone in here an entrepreneur, own your own business? So a few people. So there's never enough money in the first year, right? So we're like, okay, so that year of sacrifice turned into 5 years of sacrifice. So we were living apart for 5 years while he was in the city sending back a paycheck to cover the mortgage. I was trying to get the business up and running. And it wasn't until The Amazing Race that we had enough cushion, because that paid off our mortgage, that he could move to the farm full time. So even despite the Fabulous Beekman Boys show, despite 2 best-selling cookbooks before the one we're talking about tonight, we still had to sacrifice and have him work in the city. And so I always want to make that clear when we're speaking to audiences, because otherwise it seems like, it was just easy, and it's easy for everybody. Because in some ways it's a cautionary tale, because a lot of people say, you have this beautiful farm, you're living this idyllic life, but it's not that way.
And so we'll end with this. This is sort of the example. This is something that we started before The Amazing Race, when Brent said I was going back and we were trying to save the farm.
We were always trying to think of what is going to be that product that is so successful for us that it pays off the mortgage.
And are any gardeners in here? Anybody a gardener? So have you heard about the mortgage lifter tomato? It was a tomato that was bred in 1929. It's a wonderful tomato, old heirloom tomato. It was bred in 1929 by a farmer in West Virginia, and he sold so many of them that it was such a perfect tomato that he paid off his mortgage, so he called it the mortgage lifter tomato. So we found these seeds, and we started this right before The Amazing Race. We started growing out a field of them, and we're like, we're going to make a pasta sauce. We're going to be totally honest. We're going to call it the mortgage lifter pasta sauce, and everybody who wants Josh to move to the farm, everyone that's watching the TV show, will buy this, and we'll pay off our mortgage, and we'll be done. And then we won the race. We won the $1 million, and we had a big field of tomatoes out there. And that's when we said, that's when we decided to take it the next step. We'd helped our community. We were at that time employing somewhere in 30 like somewhere between 30 and 40 different artisans that were selling products through our company. So our company was doing well, our community was doing well. We had just won $1 million, so we took those tomatoes, we created the tomato sauce, and we give 25% back to other small farms. So we paid that money forward. And in the first year, that launched a year ago last February. In the first year, we were able to give away $13,000 in, we call them mortgage lifts to small farms. And this year, we are very close. I'm not going to say the name, so don't sweat, Brent. But we are very close to signing a deal, and it will be distributed in a major retailer that's not Walmart, but is close to Walmart.
It's a big red circle with another little red circle inside it.
So now this product and other mortgage lifter products will be sold all around the country, and next year we'll be giving away millions of dollars, and they won't have to run around the world for it. So that's kind of our story and our story of community and how we came from literally less than nothing, plus 80 goats, and
We came from $1 million in debt. That's what we came
from $1 million in debt, and how our community really lifted us up and helped make us successful, and how we're trying to pay it forward. So, thank you. Isn't that the most messy, random story ever? I don't know how it happened. Questions? Anybody have any questions? The hardest Amazing Race challenge we had to do together.
This is so easy.
Oh, it's so easy. What do you think? Did you watch it? You haven't seen it? Oh, no,
not 2001,
2012. I was like, oh my God,
Did you say
weren't born in
2001?
Okay. The hardest one was...
Yes, we had been, the first few legs of the race, we were kind of middle of the pack. You know, we would come in 5th or, 6th, 4th.
Middle end of the pack, Brent, be honest.
Yeah, lower half, top of the lower half. And then we had, then we got to a point where like, we need to be really aggressive and do something risky so that we can leapfrog in front of a bunch of other teams. And so we were trying to get from Indonesia to Russia.
So I just want to repeat the question for people who didn't hear. It was the hardest task on the Amazing Race that we both did together.
Right. And so we were trying to get to Indonesia to Russia. We were sitting at the travel agency looking at all of our options, flight options. And one flight option had us connecting through Frankfurt, Germany, with a 50-minute connection time. And neither of us had been in the Frankfurt airport before. Has anyone in here been in the Frankfurt airport? Okay, you know it's like 5 miles long.
You can't get a coffee in 50 minutes.
And but we asked the travel agent, we're like, can we make this connection? And she's like, yes, you can do it. Okay, so we're like, okay, book the flight, and because this would help us leapfrog a bunch of other teams who had chosen the more safe flight. And so we got on that plane. Literally, they pulled away from the gate, got to the runway, when the PA system came over and said, oh, there's weather delay. We're going to be sitting here for about an hour. So we literally got to Frankfurt as the other plane was taking off, and the next flight out to Moscow was not until 11 a.m. So
we arrived in Moscow when the other teams were already finishing that leg of the race. We were farther behind than any other team.
We had not slept in about 36 hours.
And then the task, your question is what the task was. The task we got to was, we opened our clue, we had to do synchronized swimming with the Russian national female Olympic team in the Olympic pool, which is like 4 times as deep as this room. And they didn't speak English.
4 times as deep.
They don't speak English. So we had this Russian team.
So you just had to watch them do the moves.
A 64-count synchronized swimming.
While treading water, and then try to...
And to add insult to injury, we had to wear flowered bathing caps and Speedos. So that was the most difficult.
And actually, what was our saving grace? Because we were so tired by this point. We thought in our heads, we're never going to be able to get this. And it had taken, we found this out later, it had taken the other teams 6 and 7 hours to master the routine. And we got there so late that the pool was closing in 2 hours. So we didn't have enough time to learn it and practice it and perform it to satisfaction. So we got a 4-hour time penalty instead. And that would have eliminated us from that leg of the race. But one of the other teams lost their passport. And so they could not advance because they didn't have their passport. And so that was how we got saved.
Other questions? So the Harvest Festival is the 20th and 21st of September this year.
Are you going to be there? Where do you live? Oh, it's
yeah.
not that far. It's not that far. You could be a vendor.
Oh, good, good.
Do you make something or sell something? Okay.
Well, come up this year and scope it out. Yeah. Anyone else?
This lady right here.
Oh, okay. Could you repeat the question, too?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was whether my drag queen experience would help me with the synchronized swimming, which is a really good question. Did you know what I did as a drag queen? So all of my drag queen outfits actually had clear plastic, cover your ears, clear plastic breasts with live goldfish swimming in them. So you'd think I would know a little bit more about aquatic sports.
And his drag name was Aquadesiac.
But between you and me, I probably would have got the routine down. He dragged me down on that one. Over here. So the question is whether we develop all the recipes in our cookbook and where we learn to cook. And so the answer, I'll do the opposite. We learn to cook. We both grew up cooking. Our families, both our moms are pretty good cooks, and our grandmas. So we knew how to cook. I had an amazing uncle who lived in France, and he and his partner were incredible cooks, and they really awakened this. They have all the markets in France that we're all having now, the fresh farmers markets. So they really taught me the value of fresh food and what to do with fresh food. But the real thing was when we moved to Sharon Springs, then, like I said, the nearest grocery store is about 40 minutes away. So we had to start cooking dinner every single night, dinner, lunch, breakfast every single night, based on things that we were growing in the garden and our animal products.
I mean, we're home cooks, so
yeah, we don't
and we
claim that
cook
we're
like a
chefs.
lot of home cooks do. You get home and you open up the refrigerator or the freezer and you say, oh, what do I have in here? We do the same thing, except we go out to the garden and say, oh, what's ready to be picked?
And here's the thing: if anybody who has a garden, you know that all of a sudden you have like 4 bushels of radishes at the same time, and that's when you get really creative with things to do with radishes. So what we do is we cook like I said, we cook dinner every night. We never make the same dish twice, and we just experiment, and we take notes with every meal, unless it's terrible, and then we ignore it.
No, that's not true, because if you follow our website or our Facebook page, if something comes out horrendous,
we'll share it.
also tell you it comes out
as a warning.
Yeah.
But then we have a great friend. One of the things we learned when we did our first cookbook was that it's actually very hard to write recipes, write and test recipes, because anybody who's a halfway decent cook, you cook at home and you never make the same thing twice, and you never write anything down, and then to test a recipe you have to do it exactly the same 3 times, and that was the hard part for us. So our friend Sandy, who works at Martha Stewart with Brent, who writes recipes for a living, she comes up every 6 months or so, and we go through the notes, and we have the best weekend you can ever imagine, going through all these meals, and we riff off one of each other and say, oh, we made this root beer reduction, and we used it on fennel, and then so we take more detailed notes with her, and then she goes home and she starts creating the actual recipes and writes them the right way that makes sense. Any other questions?
Yeah. Well, all the
Repeat the
vegetable.
question.
Yeah. Oh, so she was commenting on the photography in the Heirloom Vegetable Cookbook, and all of the vegetables that are seen in the book are from our garden, and we have worked with the photographer Paulette Tavermina on all 3 of our cookbooks, and she holds a very special place in our heart. The way we got to know her was that we, before the first book came out, first cookbook, we had organized a charity auction of heirloom vegetables, and it was the first auction of vegetables ever on the floor of Sotheby's in New York City. And so the idea was that we were selling these rare heirloom vegetables, like big crates of, tomatoes or whatnot, to the chefs in New York City. And then all the money went to help support programs that enabled inner city kids to go visit farms in upstate New York. And so Paulette graciously donated one of her photographs for the auction. She's a fine art photographer. And her style is to photograph things and light them so that the end result is that it looks like a Dutch masterwork. And so because we were already playing around with this idea of heirloom recipes in an heirloom cookbook, and so it just felt right for us. And so we went up to her and said, "We love what you're doing. Would you please consider shooting our cookbook?" And she had never shot a cookbook before. She was a fine art photographer. And she said, "Oh, yes, I think that sounds interesting." So it became a partnership. And so we shot the first 2 books, the heirloom cookbook, the first one, and then heirloom desserts, very much in her style. So if you look at either of those, they're very dark and gorgeous and brooding, and it makes you want to be there with your face in the cake or something like that. And when we started working on this book, the inspiration was really vintage seed catalogs, and those vibrant drawings of vegetables in the seed catalogs and on the seed packets. And so I went to Paulette and I said, this is the direction we're taking on the Heirloom Vegetable Cookbook. Do you think that you can do that? Because her style is so dark and moody. And she said, "I don't know." And but she said, "I'm up to the challenge." And the result was this book. I think she rose to the challenge.
So maybe we'll take one more question, and then
I
we're
think
done.
we got plenty of time.
Well, it's 8:30. Yes. So the question is there anything that shows the inside of the house? And
There are. If you go to
we did the country living.
Yeah, if you go to our website and just type in Beekman Mansion, there'll be several posts where we show some interior shots of the house. Our next book that comes out next October is a style book, which really shows all the details of how we've done the house. But you can still see some of them online right now.
Oh, one more.
Okay.
You grow everything from seed yourself, and how do you choose your seed?
This is
Yep.
a good story,
So the
too.
question, do we choose, or do we grow everything from seed, and where do we get our seeds? We grow most everything from seed or direct sow, and we get it from a company called Landreth Seed, which is the oldest seed company in America, and it's also the 4th oldest corporation in America.
And they happen to be our next door neighbor.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Because when
Yeah,
we
exactly.
when we first started farming, we had heard of heirloom tomatoes, right? Because everyone knows heirloom tomato. But it was Barb, who owns that company, Barb Malera, who's like, "Oh, well, there's heirloom peas, and there's heirloom corn, and there's heirloom peppers, and whatnot." And she's the one who really taught us about heirloom vegetables and the importance of them.
And it was wonderful because she sat down.
Biodiversity.
When we did our first garden, we sat with her and we went through all of her old seed books from 1802, in the surrounding years. And our very first garden was created based on the different seed varieties that William Beekman would have planted.
And that's actually one of the things that we didn't talk about with our company is that William Beekman, who built our farm originally, as you can see from the picture, it's a very grand house. And the source of his wealth was that he was the original merchant in our area of upstate New York. And so the whole area used to be called Beekman Corners. And right less than a mile from where the farm is was what was called the Lunenburg Turnpike, which was the beginning of the West. So if you go back to 1802, we hadn't done the Louisiana Purchase yet, right? And so there would be wagon trains leaving all the time from the Northeast, heading out west, and his mercantile was like the last stop for gas, And so that was the source of his wealth. And so a lot of the things that we design or put into our mercantile, we think, one, what would William Beekman have had in his mercantile? And then how can we put a modern twist on it? And so it was so fascinating to us to learn about Landreth from our neighbor, and because Landreth Seed would have been the seed that he had in his mercantile. Because there was a time in American history where Landreth was so large that it sent a seed catalog to every single house in America. And every president, from George Washington to FDR, grew seeds from Landreth Seed. So it was just kind of a full circle thing that she just happened to be there and taught us about it.
So I think that's, if anybody wants to learn more, you can go to Beekman 1802 is our site, and you'll see all of our products, and you'll notice that they all kind of do harken back. We draw from William Beekman himself. We always say we're a 212-year-old company that was just out of business for a couple hundred years, and so we're bringing it back. So we really want to thank Sue Ellen and everyone for bringing us here, and Cape Air was wonderful too. And we hope you come visit us in Sharon Springs.